Hello everyone, my name is Belinda Constant. I serve today as the mayor of the city of Gretna. But today what we're celebrating is the history of our city. Let me start with myself. I was born and raised here in the city, actually born many years ago, attended St. Joseph Grammar School, which of course is no longer here, but was right close to St. Joseph Catholic Church, which is a wonderful building still located in our city. After leaving St. Joseph Grammar School, I attended and graduated from Archbishop Blank High School in 1974. And of course, as most of you may know, Archbishop Blank is no longer there, but the school still exists as Thomas Jefferson Magnet School right here in the city of Gretna. I moved around the West Bank for many years and then came back to the city in the early 1990s. Got involved at that time in historic preservation and became real interested in preserving the history of our city. My husband and I purchased a home on Huey P. Long Avenue, and then I guess, as they say, the rest is history. In 2005, I ran to be the first woman elected to the Gretna City Council, and today I serve as mayor after being elected to that seat in April 2013. It was an exciting time then because there had never been a woman elected to the seat of mayor before 2013, and it also was the year we celebrated our centennial year, 100 years of the city of Gretna being incorporated. You know, at this time, I'd like to also talk about the people that serve with me every day. Wayne Rao, Councilman Wayne Rao is elected at large, and there are 4 council members who serve with me. District 1, Councilman Milton Crosby. District 2, Councilman Joseph Marino III. District 3, Councilman Mark Miller, and District 4 is Councilman Jackie Berthelot, whose vision brings us here today. I am so thankful to the councilman for his vision in preserving the great things about our city. You know, we're here a city, we're filled with history, and we're going to hear today about its history from several individuals in just a few minutes. It's not about the things they've learned or heard, but it's about the lives they lived and the experiences that they've also shared with their families and friends. And now we get to stand here, take part in this vision for the preservation of history for many generations to come. I so know and hope that once you hear this, you too will fall in love with the city of Gretna through the lives of the people that have gone before us for many years.
My name is Mabel Manus Meyer. I grew up in Gretna. I was born on Amelia Street, one street over. I am 94 years old. I have very fond memories of this particular room, in a sense, but I remember it as having 2 bedrooms over there, a living room, dining room, and kitchen over here. I was the only girl in this neighborhood. Now, my house was directly behind here on Amelia, on the street over. I was the only girl in the neighborhood. So when Miss Rupel's niece, I believe it was, came from California with her little girl, they moved in with Miss Rupel, and I had a playmate then. Betty and I became great friends. Well, we were allowed to have total access to the living room area where we played piano, we danced with the hand crank gramophone, and but I remember Miss Rupel saying, "But don't touch the mahjong set." To this day, I don't know what a mahjong set looks like. Well, let's see, anyway, out back from the Rupel house was a big, what I remember being kind of red building. It was before it became well, I don't know, but anyway, it was an important building because it housed the outside bathroom. Nobody had inside bathrooms at that time of the year, at that time. So anyway, that was important. Well, from here, David Crockett Fire Hall right next door. Apparently the upstairs floor was the only social center in Gretna because there were little kiddie birthday parties, bigger birthday parties, wedding showers or whatever, all on the top floor of the fire station. Well, one day, a gentleman came to town. We'll call him the music man, except he was not a con artist. He was a music man. He came over here. He had a young people's band in New Orleans, and he came over here to acquire new students and to create a band. Well, Betty and I both got involved in that, but when it came time to choose an instrument, and it was suggested clarinet, saxophone, oh no, my mother said, all that blowing might be bad for her chest. I ended up with drums, and I dearly loved, I played drums well past my senior year in high school in a jazz band and whatnot. Anyway, that was an interesting part of my life. Well, at the time we were practicing here, when I had developed to where I was accepted in the New Orleans band, I had to go there on a Saturday for practice. And my mom said, get on the phone and call them and tell them you won't be to practice today because of the fire. I said, fire? What fire? The big fertilizer plant, which was just across the street, took the whole square, was on fire. I didn't know that. And I saw no reason why I had to miss band practice because of a fire. Well, of course I did. Went back to my house, and the people began moving out of their homes a bit on Amelia Street. I don't know where we were going. We were just walking, moving away a little bit. Well, the fire was, shall I say, contained. The building burned to the ground. I never saw the fire at all, even though the side of our house was scorched a bit. Well, that became the Straley Playground. And Lloyd Gomez, who was sort of an entrepreneur in this area, was instrumental, I think, in having a tennis court built there. And so I soon got very interested in tennis, and among the persons who played, and I'm sure were instrumental in the place being built, was a former mayor, how can I have forgot? Bill White and Judge Julian Samuel and other prominent persons of this area. Well, anyway, at that time, too, Matthew's grocery store was diagonally across from this building, right on the corner. And I remember you could go there. I think it was a 2-liter drink that was introduced at that time. There was a large drink in a bottle, and it didn't have much taste. I believe it was a 7-Up, I don't know. But it didn't have much taste. But it was wet and cold, and so it served the purpose. And it soon quickly acquired the name Billy Wash. But Matthew's store, I remember Mr. Matthews slicing ham off the bone. Oh, he would slice that ham like that so diligently and sharpen his knife a little bit. He did a beautiful job, and the ham smelled so good. It didn't come out square and round like ham does nowadays. But one of the interesting things in the store, too, there was a candy case. It was about a 4x6 glass enclosed case where you bought candy when you had some money. He would go with you there and slide the glass door open so you could make your selection. Well, in that case, there was a little container of small, round, chocolate-covered things that looked kind of like a mint, but you paid a penny, you broke it open. If it was white, okay, that's what you got. You bought another one. If it was pink, you won a candy bar. That probably cost a whole nickel. Anyway, that was interesting about Matthews. Well, Saturday afternoon, I had eventually gotten big enough I could go to the movie house by myself, which was about 4 blocks from here. We'd walk up 2nd Street, and there was a big store of some nature on the corner. I don't know, it just was a big dark building. I don't know what they sold except for Cracker Jack. You could buy a box of Cracker Jack for a nickel and then move on with the balance of your 25 cents and go to the movies. Okay, movie was black and white, no sound, piano player sitting on the right, and that was it. But there was always a serial on a Saturday with a continued story, where the villains were forever chasing the good man, and the good man would finally get up on the edge of a cliff, maybe. What was he going to do? To be continued was across the screen, which meant, if you want to know what happened to him, come back next week. Of course, next week he was in another turmoil. Growing up in Gretna was ideal, I guess you'd say. We had what we needed. We had loving family and friends. Unfortunately, when I think back about something, I want to say, what was that? There's nobody to ask. I'm a little too old for everybody to ask. But I have a picture of my dad, my oldest brother, who at that time had long black curls. He was about 4. My mom and another brother and somebody else I don't know, in the Model T Ford, which was the first automobile in Gretna. I would like to have known, I don't know what became of that or anything, but I understand it didn't go very fast. So sometimes the little boys would jump on the little narrow running board until my dad would get to chase them off. What else to say about Gretna? So many memories, but those days are gone. They were wonderful memories.
My name is Frank Manus, and I'm a junior. I will be 87 years old in January of this coming year. Okay, as I said, I was born in Gretna in 1928, and my family lived on Lafayette Street, in the first block of Lafayette Street. Across the street from us was, the whole block was built by, it was a fertilizer plant. And it was bounded by Lafayette Street, Amelia Street, First and Second, consumed the whole block. When I was a real youngster, I'm saying 5 or 6 years old, the fertilizer plant caught on fire and burned to the ground. We at that time had to, all the houses along Lafayette Street in that block were kind of scorched by the fire. Anyway, after the fire, and they cleared that lot completely, it was decided to make a playground out of the whole lot. So at that time it was called Straley's Playground. And on the weekends, especially on Sunday, they would have baseball games in the park. Also, I failed to mention that my grandparents lived right there on Amelia Street, 210 Amelia Street. Aunt Mabel, this is my aunt. I had a couple of uncles. One Uncle George was instrumental in building a tennis court, or having built a tennis court on that same empty lot. Like I say, that fire took place, I think, in about, I'm gonna say 34, I would have been about 6 years old. Anyway, they made a playground out of the park, and on Sundays they had baseball games out there. And other activities that they could use the park for, and of course the tennis court too. Then about that time, the story I got is Mr. Red Lieber, who was the chauffeur for the David Crockett Fire Company. He went to a fire, and the kid the boy who was that family, he was crying because he lost his kite. The kite burned up. So Mr. Lieber decided to make him a kite, and he did, and the kid was very grateful. And after that, Mr. Lieber decided to make kites to give to the kids. So he made a lot of kites, and he got help from some of the gentlemen that I have a list of names, but I'm not going to list them. He got help from the people around the neighborhood, some of the politicians, and they made kites that year. And they decided to have a kite giveaway and a parade. The first year they gave kites away, Mr. Lieber and them built, according to my notes, they gave away about 200 kites. Then they had their parade, and they had people go out in the field and heist their kites, and of course there was a lot of entanglements and things like that. The first year they gave away about 200 kites, and they had a little parade around a little part of Gretna here, and they'd go out in the field and heist their kites. The second year, he had about 500 kites. Same thing, and of course it got a little more crowded out in the field. I understand the third year, they had about 1,100 kites. They totaled it in 1938, they totaled all the kites they had given away, and they had given away over the years 5,000 kites. So anyway, that was called Kite Day. They would march around Gretna showing off their kites. When you got out in the field, there was a lot of entanglements, but they had some real big kites. They would have star kites, fish kites, cellophane kites, fireman kites. They would make kites in the form of firemen. They have airplane kites, and some kites were very large. They'd even use some kind of light rope to hoist them. But I understand the Crockett's, they furnished all the kites and all the string and everything for the kite parade. So that was a big part of history in Gretna.
Hello, my name is Hazel Manus. I am 87 years old. I live in Gretna all my life. I was born in 1927. My current address is 1509 Thomas Street, Gretna, Louisiana. I will tell you my remembrances of Mrs. Ruppel's Mardi Gras parades. I started school in 1933. Mrs. Lily White Rupel was principal of my school, Gretna number 1. Today, this location is where the American German Museum is, between 5th and 6th Street. The basement of the school on 6th Street was where the boys stayed during recess, and the basement on the 5th Street side was where the girls played. Boys and girls reported to the girls' basement at assembly before you went to your classes. Mrs. Rupel decided we would have a Mardi Gras parade at school. I understand there were parades before this. With the help of a construction company, our fathers, and 7th grade boys, our grades only went to 7th grade. Then you went to Gretna High through 11th. These people built the floats placed on top of wagons, regular toy wagons with long handles. I'm sure they were wagons from the kids at school. Anyway, these floats were pulled several blocks on Huey P. Long, up and down Huey P. Long, by some grown-up people. I was on a float 2 times while I was in grammar school, once as an apple picker and once as a country girl. I do not know how the floats were constructed, but they seemed very sturdy. We always had a king and a queen dressed in their royal clothes. I remember that very well. Our Mardi Gras parades were enjoyed by everyone. We looked forward to that day. Thank you for listening to my story.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Rao Swartz. I was born in 1928, and I was born in Gretna. I live in Gretna. Right now, I live at 529 9th Street. I was born on Amelia Street, and I've lived on Amelia Street and 9th Street all of my life. The only 2 places where I've ever lived. Hazel was talking about number 1 school, Gretna Elementary number 1. I went to Gretna Elementary number 2 school. It was on Amelia Street. It was the newer of the elementary schools. When we had too many students for Gretna number 1, they had to hurry up and build Gretna number 2 to put the excess students into. Instead of having a parade, our school each year would have a picnic, and we would go into the woods, and the woods was where Shoney's is today. We called that back of Gretna in the woods. We'd have a big picnic, light a big picnic fire, roast wieners. We just had a ball, spent the whole day back there. The boys would try to jump the canal, what we called canals. There was nothing but big ditches. But some of them would fall in. It was a lot of fun. And then we would all come home, and that was our big event for the year. We also had a Mayfest in the yard, in the schoolyard, where we would do a dance around the maypole, and that was a lot of fun. Of course, we had the public invited to that. That wasn't just a school function, that was a public function. I married my husband, who lived a block away from me all my life, and we were married for 63 years. So I spent all my life in Gretna. I'm strictly Gretna personified. I remember the kite day, because we used to go to kite day. And I remember pulling my little skiff in the ditch when it rained. We didn't have paved streets like we do today. We had streets with ditches, and when it rained, the ditch would flood up with water, and we'd all pull our little boats to the street. It was a lot of fun. We had a great neighborhood where we would play. We'd all get together and play. We'd play at night until 9 o'clock. When 9 o'clock came, your parents said, "Come on in." You went in, took a bath, and went to bed. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to live, and I still enjoy living here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ruth Zafel. I was born in 1925 in Gretna, and I live currently at 235 Pike Drive. That's Gretna, that's in a Garden Park area of Gretna. When I was a child, Gretna was small, about 10 blocks wide and about 11 blocks deep, and just about everybody knew everybody. The streets were either mud or gravel with gutters on both sides to drain the water, of course, from rain. Most of the houses were built on 30-foot lots and above ground on brick or stone pillars because, of course, they would flood if it hadn't been done that way. There were no driveways because there were no cars at that time. The houses were mostly one-room houses, one room wide, from front to back, and some of them still exist. They call them shotgun houses nowadays. And the reason that's called shotgun houses is people used to say that you could stand in front of the house and shoot a shotgun bullet right through the front of the house, and it would go straight through without hitting anything because they were only one room wide. There were two public schools at that time, number 1 school and number 2. Miss Lily White Rupel was the principal of number 1 school when I went. And my sister, Leonora Zafel, was principal of number 2, but she also taught at number 1 prior to that. As a result of her teaching at Gretna number 1, she would take both me and my sister Myra, who will speak shortly, to school with her and let Myra sit in 1st grade. Miss Rupel allowed that. Nowadays, that would not be possible. But Miss Rupel allowed her to sit in there. At the end of the year, when I went to 2nd grade, Myra was allowed to try 2nd grade too, because even though she was only 5 and a half, they allowed her to try 1st grade on the basis that if she did not make it, got to do that over. She was allowed to try 2nd grade on the basis that if she did not succeed, she would have to start over in 1st. That, of course, was not a problem. So everything went fine there. I remember Huey P. Long speaking, coming down to Gretna during one of his campaigns. And he spoke on the neutral ground area of what is now Huey Long. It was Copernicus at that time. And he was campaigning, and he was, his motto was a chicken in every pot, and every man a king, and so forth. He said that he was appalled that Gretna had no paved streets at that time. Huey Long didn't exist as it is today. It was shell. And he promised the people of Gretna that if we would vote for him as governor of Louisiana, that he would see to it that Huey P. Long Avenue, currently Huey P. Long Avenue, or Copernicus it was then, that Copernicus Street would be paved if we would name it after him. And that is how Huey P. Long Avenue got its name. And he did pave it. He paid for the paving. Anyway, there were two main elementary schools in Gretna at that time, Gretna number 1 and Gretna number 2. And as I said, Miss Lily White Rupel was the principal at that time. And to add something to Hazel's note about the Mardi Gras floats, I should say that they built the floats down in the boys' side of the basement. They only had single doors then. No one thought about the fact that the floats would be too big to get out of the basement. So the day that they were to parade, they had to get a man in there to break out the wall of the basement and put in, and eventually they put in double doors, and that's where the double doors came from that are there now. I went to high school. Gretna, Mara and I both went to Gretna High School. I'm supposed to do this. And Miss Helen Cox was principal. Miss Helen Cox lived right here, I think it was. She was principal, and she set up a radio in the auditorium in 1942. So that and called all the students, the whole student body, to come into the auditorium of Gretna High School. When we got in there, we had no idea why she did that. But when we got into the auditorium, she announced that she wanted all of the students in Gretna High to hear President Franklin Roosevelt declare war against Japan in December 1941. Gretna used to practice blackouts during the war. Sugar was rationed, butter was rationed, meat, shoes, people did without. But we were always glad to do that. Our class was the last class to graduate under Mrs. Helen Cox. Since Mara had skipped first grade, she and I went all the way to school, through school together. Mara was valedictorian when she graduated from Gretna High, and I was salutatorian. The first and only time that I know of where two sisters graduated together from Gretna High School. When we then went 4 years to Newcomb College during World War II. And at that time, almost all the male students were in ROTC and in naval uniforms. There was St. Joseph Catholic School, Salem Lutheran School, Gretna number 1 school, Gretna number 2 school, Gretna High School. They were all for white students. And then there was Frederick Douglass Elementary School for black students. There was a convent with for boarding the schools, boys for the school, for the Catholic school, St. Joseph Catholic School, and that building still stands. My father had a grocery store. There were many grocery stores in Gretna, almost on all the corners. My father had a grocery store, although his trade originally was a blacksmith. But he had the grocery store until he retired, and then he sold the business, but kept the house and the building facility. So I guess that's about it.
Hello, my name is Myra Zafel Tallheim. I was born in the year 1927, and I currently live at 110 South Randall Court in Garden Park in Gretna. Things I remember from the time I grew up in Gretna. One of the first things I remember is that the laundry was always done on Mondays, and there was no such thing as washing machines. Everybody had to scrub on a scrubbing board in a tub, and the water was heated on a furnace. There was no hot water heaters at that time. And the laundry had to be hung on the line. It was hand wrung, and people had wires or ropes strung across the yard that they used for hanging the laundry on with clothespins. There was a clothespole man who used to come around to sell poles to support those lines. While people were doing the laundry, they would cook dried beans. It's a slow cooking process, and they would cook either red beans or white beans. And so on Mondays, it seems that might be the reason we now see all the restaurants having red beans on Monday. I think that was probably where it came from. Nearly everybody had a home garden. They grew their own vegetables. And I know my father had a garden, and he would grow corn and eggplants and okra, things like that. Also, a lot of people had chickens, and my dad had chickens, and I can remember going and collecting the eggs, picking up the eggs. And of course, when the hens got too old to lay eggs anymore, well then, they got cooked. They became chicken stew. We had a lot of dairies in Gretna, well, several, not a lot, but milk was delivered. It was put in glass bottles and was delivered to the door. You got your milk in the morning, you put it in the refrigerator. Oh, we didn't have refrigerators, we had ice boxes. And then the next day, you'd wash out the bottles and you'd put them back out. And when the milkman came again the next day, he would pick up the empty bottles and take them back and refill them. At that time, there was no such thing as homogenized milk. The cream always separated and went to the top of the bottle. So you had to shake the bottle of milk before you poured it out so that it would blend the cream with the milk. There were many grocery stores in Gretna. There was practically one on every corner. At that time, my dad had a grocery store on the corner of 6th and Lavazia, right across from the Catholic Church. And he would sell people, at this particular time, in the early 30s, we had a depression. And so people were a little short on money, and they didn't always have cash with them when they came into the store. They would have money, but my dad would let them buy on credit. So he would keep a record of who owed him money and so forth. Well, money was so tight that at that time, people would come in to buy a half a nickel of rice and a half a nickel of beans, which was really enough food to feed a family. But he had to then remember how much, if they only bought a half a nickel, then he had to remember and keep a book as to owing these people a half a nickel, 2.5 cents. So he got the idea that he would get coins stamped out. I have one here. It was made of aluminum, and on one side was his initials, WZ, and on the other side was marked 2.5 cents. Of course, this could only be used at my father's store. So it made it easier, though, because then people would have the coin to come back in with for the other 2.5 cents. It saved a lot of bookkeeping. Also, at that time, you know, this was a German settlement, and Germans like their beer. And so we also had bar rooms on nearly every corner. And there was no such thing as bottled beer at that time. Beer only came in kegs. And so it was bought, people would take a little bucket, they'd go and buy a bucket of beer. And they had small buckets like this. And this was used at that time, this is one that was used, to go and get a bucket of beer. There were several gambling places also that I remember. One was the Billionaire Cafe, or Billionaire Club, up on New Long Avenue, right across from the courthouse, actually. I think that was one of the longest ones that lasted. There was also one on 2nd Street called the Blue Light Inn. So gambling was very popular also, and it was allowed. The Gretna had a very small jail. It was located, originally, the original jail was located on 5th Street, right next to what was Heavy's Bakery. It was a small jail. There were only about 3 or 4 cells in it. But then later on, the city built a jail up on 4th Street, 4th and Durbany. And at that time, while that jail was in operation, there was a murder committed in McDonoughville. 2 men, their names were Dalio and Capacey. They killed a grocery man down in McDonoughville, and they were sentenced to die by hanging. I can remember seeing the gallows that were built on the corner of Durbany and 4th Street. We did not see the hanging. Well, my dad did. And of course, like the Wild West, they were sentenced to hang at high noon. And that's when they were hanged. It was the last public execution in the state of Louisiana. We had several things that occurred annually. There was an annual parade from the Crockett Fire Company. That was always preceded, they pulled the old steamer, and Miss Ivy, can't think of her name. I had it written. She rode the steamer. Well, that was one of in the spring, there was always a fireman's parade. Also, there were 2 school functions. The Catholic school, St. Joseph's Catholic School, always had a 4th of July picnic. That was always there. And then the Salem Lutheran School always had a summer picnic where they had food and games and a stage that they would build. They would have programs on. So these were regular things that people looked forward to. I remember, of course, a lot of the businesses that aren't there anymore. On Front Street, 1st Street, there was Brown's Restaurant and Bar. There was the Ice House right at the corner of Newton Street on the levee. There was a men's store. There was Samuel's department store. There was the Magic Hoodoo up there. And there was Colmoni's shoe shop, shoe repair. There were also 2 actual shoemakers, which I remember. I don't think too many people remember them. There was Boudreaux's on Newton Street, and on Lafayette and 3rd Street was Fasulo, as we said Fasulo. But they were actually shoemakers. Mr. Boudreaux and Mr. Fasulo were actual shoemakers. They really made shoes. And then, of course, Gretna had just about everything you needed. You wouldn't really have to go across the river for anything. Gretna had barrel makers. Let's see, there was Evans Cooperage and J&L Steel Barrel. We had lumber. The Rathbone Lumber Company was right there on 3rd and Amelia. And concrete, Carlo Ditta on 5th Street. We had hardware stores, Cochran's on Lafayette, and Neeb's also on Lafayette. There was Duvick's on Huey Long. And all along, most of the businesses were along Huey Long. And starting at the river, we had an H.G. Hill store on one side and an A&P store on the other side. There was Wilson's Dime store, and then there was Duvick's Hardware, and then we had 2 notable restaurants. It was Butterich's on Huey Long and Bernie's on 2nd Street, 2nd and Newton. And then, of course, there was Stump's Drug Store, which had the only soda fountain in Gretna, and that was a very popular place. And then later along, where the current Common Grounds, where Common Grounds is currently, that was Lesson's Chevrolet. And across the street from that, there was the Best Ice Cream Parlor, and the teenagers used to hang around there. And it was just, that was the main business area there. Well, there are a lot of things I remember, but can't begin to tell you all of them anyway. But, oh, there were churches. Besides the Catholic Church, there was a Lutheran church. There was a Presbyterian church on 3rd and Amelia. There was Baptist church there also. And the blacks had 2 churches that are still in existence. They began in 1863, was the New Hope Baptist Church on 7th Street. And then there's Mount Zion on Huey Long. That was started in 1872. I can remember the black funerals as they are today. They would play solemn music going to the cemetery, and then on the way back, they'd have a second line with joyful music. In fact, they used to sing, "I'm glad you're dead, you rascal you." That was one of the things they used to play on the back, on the return from the cemetery. So there were a lot of good memories we have from those old days.
Hello, my name is Catherine Eisman Gegenheimer, and I lived in Gretna all my life. Oh, wait a minute, I was born, though, in Marrera. And then 5 days later, they moved to Gretna in a little single house with 3 rooms. And that time is when we had our Great Depression. People had no jobs, and you had to do the best you could do. My daddy didn't have a very much education, so he had to work very hard. And my mother, she made homemade bread to sell so we could have a little extra money. She also, well, I shouldn't even say this, but she also made beer. And people would come there and buy beer from her. And then I was
I was born on September the 28th, 1924. And I lived in that little house till I was about 15. And then my daddy and mama moved us to another house and on Durbanish Street, a little further up. And then he and his friends built a home for us on Delhorn Street, 9th Street in Gretna, same place, Gretna. Then I grew up there, going to school and going to church. And I had, oh goodness, I did, like I said, I didn't know I was to do this, so I don't have much notes to say about, but I was, I guess, yeah, during that Great Depression. And when I was 15 years old, I used to go up Kelly's Grocery, that was on 6th Street, and we made snowballs. A friend of mine, I helped her, and she helped me, and we sold snowballs on the corner. And that is where I met the love of my life. And he came by, and he was going out that night, and he had on a white suit. I can remember that forever and ever. And I told him, "Oh, you going out?" He says, "Yes, I've got a date." So I said, "Okay," and I said, "But I want a snowball first." So I fixed the snowball, and I said, "What kind? What you want on it?" He said, "Give me red berry." So I said, "Here." And when I did, he said something else, and I don't recall what it said, but I threw the snowball on him. So he got so mad, I thought he was going to hit me, because that's how mad he got. So he went home, and I said, "Oh my God, he'll never like me again or even talk to me again." So he went home and changed, and he came back there and waited till we closed the snowball stand. Excuse me. And then he walked me and my friend home. And that was the beginning of our romance. And then from then on, well, then the war came along, and he had to go to war. So he left in that was in 1944, and he came back on that Christmas on a furlough, and I was 17 then. And so he wanted us to get married because he was going to be stationed in Texas for a good while, and he was in the meat business, so he knew how to do all that. And then they hired and wanted him to run the quartermaster's building. So and so we got married, and his name was Elwood, like my son, and I have 3 children from him: Kathleen, Barbier, and Carol Sino. And she was the last one. And so everything went all right until he died. And I sold my big house on Durbin Street next to the grocery store. And they built me a house. My son-in-law built a house for me in Woodland West in Harvey. So I have lived in that house ever since. And I came up here to a meeting and I loved it. And I said I'll come back again, and this is where I am today.